Okay, so this video here, we're going to be looking at how we can find a rule using a graph. Okay, so previously we've looked at creating a rule from a table. Now we want to use it from a graph. So our learning goals are seen here. So hopefully you remember from last lesson our rise and our run, finding the gradient, etc. We're going to learn a new rule here of how to find that rule. So make sure you're taking notes from there. So firstly, before we begin, I want to make sure that you remember this from last lesson. So when we try to find a rule using a table, we sort of looked at this as our example. And our rule was, okay, so y equals, and then we'd find out what the coefficient of x was by seeing how often this goes up. And you'll be able to find out from there, obviously from the increase in the y. But we also noticed that wherever what 0 was going to be our constant from there. So just to make sure if you aren't familiar with that, make sure you go back to that previous lesson because it helps us understand a bit more about what we're looking at in this instance. So when you're trying to find a rule for a straight line graph, you're basically doing the same thing, however, you're just observing it on a graph. So the rule for a straight line graph is, and just get you to write this down, is y equals mx plus c. And sometimes it can be y equals mx plus b. In most cases, we're going to use c. So we're going to get you to write that down, but each of these individual letters here means something else, okay? So the m in this case, in this rule, is the gradient, okay? So remember our gradient is rise over run, okay? So that's how you calculate m. So by finding m, in this case, it's the gradient. And the c, in this case, is the y-intercept. So what we mean by the y-intercept is the point that the line reaches or crosses over the y-axis. So you can see in this case, as soon as that line hits there, that's what we call the y-intercept. So to calculate the rule, this is what we do in this case. We'd use this one as our example here. So we write our rule, y equals mx plus c, and we're going to find these two information here to put in. Firstly, we want to find out what m is, and remember m is our gradient. So in this case here, it is rise, which is 2, over run, which is 1. Hence we have 2 over 1, which equals 2. So we just substitute in here now. So we've got 2x. Now we find our c by basically looking at our y-intercept. So y-intercept occurs right here at -1 on the y-axis. That's where it intercepts the line. So that becomes -1. And that's our formula that we've created from looking at the graph. Okay, so what we want to move on from here now is to have a quick example of maybe lines or rules when we have either horizontal or vertical line. Okay, so basically all you need to understand for these ones is because either one of the variables is a 0, so in this case it'll be the x or the y axis, the rule slightly changes. So the horizontal line, okay, in this case, the ones that go straight across, you see the x is always remain the same. So the rule here is y equals c. So remember that c previously means our y-intercept. So the rule basically is that you just need to find here the y-intercept, which will be there. So the rule here is y equals 5 because 0 always stays the same. And the same will be in this case, the rule here, which is x equals k. Okay, we're finding x because y will always stay the same. Is just the point of x, the intercept. So in these cases here, as you can see, x equals 4 and x equals -2. And in this case, y equals -4 and y equals 5. So what we're going to do here is let's look at some examples. So show you what this looks like in motion. We're going to do the first question here. Okay, we want to find the rule for the following. So we've got the rule there, and remember that we need to make sure we set out our work. So we have the rule y. We'll go back and we'll confirm y equals mx plus c. Y equals mx plus c. Okay, so we know we want to find these two things here, where m is the gradient. Okay, so the gradient again is rise from these points. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the run is 1. So we have 4 over 1, which equals 4. And our y-intercept in this case, again, as you can see here, is -1. So c equals -1. Now we simply just substitute these values into our formula, and that will give our result. So in this case, y equals 4x minus 1. So that's how we do it in that. So just by following that simple rule, as long as you understand the gradient, etc. We'll do a negative example now again for b. Okay, so again, y equals mx plus c. We're going to find these two values here. Our gradient in this case, I can see that it goes down. So the rise is negative, so m will equal negative 4 over 2. And our y-intercept up here is plus 4, so c equals plus 4. Okay, so we have negative 2, sorry, negative 4 over 2, which will equal negative 2. So we can simply write our rule, y equals negative 2x plus 4. Okay, so that's how we calculate it using those rules. So you just find the gradient and then you find the y-intercept, and that will tell you your rule from there. So again, just a little reminder again about these two. So here you want to write the rules for these vertical lines. So again, we can just look at simply at the y-axis. So the first one here for A would be y equals negative 3 because x is always the same. It's always at 0, sorry. So our y-intercept here is negative 3. And for B, it'll be the same where we're finding x. X equals on the x-intercept 7. So that's how you calculate the rule using a graph. So we've done it with the table, now we've done it with the graph. We'll be moving on from there, so making sure you ask any questions in class and we'll be able to validate them from there. Thanks, boys.